The Prime Minister ends the parliamentary year with a win and a wedding, while Barnaby Joyce splits with the Nationals. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. What a year for Anthony Albanese. A landslide election victory, an opposition still divided, and now a wedding at the Lodge. He proposed to Jodie Hayden on Valentine's Day last year and now becomes the first Prime Minister to get married while in office. Just days earlier, the PM was cutting a deal with the Greens to pass an overhaul of environment laws. The Coalition and some business groups aren't happy, nor is Barnaby Joyce on a range of fronts. After a sandwich press steak dinner with Pauline Hanson, he's finally quit the Nationals.
Morning, Prime Minister.
Well, hello everybody.
How are you all?
You all set to go, folks?
Righto, hit me.
A beautiful environment. For a good day for the environment.
This is the week.
Time is running out for the federal government to pass environment laws.
And it's going to happen with either the Coalition or the Greens.
The Coalition or the Greens.
This government is playing games.
There's a lot of work to do.
And it's either going to be with you or it's going to be with you.
We promised we would reform Australia's broken environmental laws. Today we deliver that promise.
The changes to speed up approvals for housing and renewables projects and
establishing Australia's first environmental protection agency.
A dirty deal done with the Greens party.
Well, the Greens are determined to get shit done.
I must say that the Greens showed maturity.
But the Coalition, they could have played an active role, but they chose not to.
We are the true opposition in this country.
This is a good deal.
Greens Alliance is well and truly back in business.
Pauline Hanson is sparking controversy
after she walked in wearing a burqa.
They shut me down completely.
Oh, look, it's just a bunch of dog whistling bullshit. She went back to her office to host a special dinner guest.
Chewing over whether he'll join One Nation.
Well, I told you I was going to wine and dine him.
All right, cool. Wasn't exactly a, high-class dining. I just say to Barnaby to look before you leap, mate.
We'll see what happens.
Member for New England.
So after 30 years with the National Party, I am resigning.
Joyce, are you going for One Nation?
I haven't made that decision yet.
Well, I don't know. I'm back here. He's in Canberra.
If he goes to One Nation, he will be absolutely trashing his legacy.
They've lost their way. OK, guys, thank you very much.
A spike in inflation went up to 3.8%.
It's uncomfortably above where the Reserve Bank would like it to be.
Inflation doesn't always moderate in a straight line.
Electricity costs rising 37%.
As those state rebates end.
You were always going to get a lift.
Time and energy are running out.
The federal government is leaving open the option of extending power bill subsidies.
We'll make that decision closer to the release of the mid-year update.
Jim Chalmers keeps spending your money to try and say he's bringing down your energy bill.
And that is why I refer to it as Jimflation.
And I wish everyone a wonderful Christmas.
I wish you a safe, peaceful and restorative break. I wish you, Jodie and Nathan, a safe and peaceful Christmas.
Well, my guest this morning is the Nationals leader, David Littleproud. First, let's check what's making news. And love at the Lodge, power and the passion, plenty of coverage of the prime ministerial wedding. It was a relatively low-key and private affair with around 80 guests, including family, friends and close political allies. Toto was the ring bearer. In News Corp papers, Shadow Home Affairs Minister John O'Doniam is flagging a citizenship-style test on Australian values for new visa holders and tougher English language requirements as part of the Coalition's new immigration policy to be unveiled in coming weeks. By contrast, Susan Lee has stressed the problem's not about any migrant or migrant community, it's a failure of infrastructure. And global airlines are scrambling to fix a software glitch on Airbus A320 jets that's thrown travel plans into chaos for thousands of Australians over the weekend. Jetstar says all flights should run as planned today, but is warning of possible flow-on delays. Well, Anthony Albanese had plenty of reasons to celebrate yesterday, a lovely wedding and a strong finish to the parliamentary year. Yes, there are still big challenges facing the government: power prices, inflation, fixing the budget. But what happened on environment laws was a demonstration of how dramatically the political landscape has changed. Before the election, Labor wouldn't do a deal with the Greens on these laws. Now, it's less worried about criticism from business groups and a weakened coalition. Let's see what the panel makes of it. We're joined this week by Karen Middleton, Sakkal and Claudia Long. Very good morning to all of you. I know we typically cover politics, not weddings, but we've got to start with this one, Karen.
Bit of a crossover today.
A bit of crossover today. We've never seen a Prime Minister get married while in office. And I suppose a tricky balance always to strike. You don't want to go over the top. Yep. People are still hurting with cost of living, so you don't want a big glitzy, showy affair. Did he get the right balance?
I think so. I mean, the lodge is where they live. It was private, it was understated. The opposition, interestingly, are saying that they're fine with it. You can imagine, though, if they'd had it at Kirribilli in Sydney with the grand harbour views, that the reaction might have been slightly different. But I'm guessing Susan Lee has calculated. She's had a couple of sort of cheap shots lately, didn't go so well. So this one, they're just saying congratulations and leaving it at that.
Paul, this was incredibly tightly held, wasn't it? There was not a whisper of this publicly, at least.
Yeah, well, you say we cover politics here, not weddings, but this wedding was highly political and the Prime Minister treated it as such. There was a risk that this was going to turn into a real circus. People will remember that this was actually meant to be held before the last election. It was delayed in part because the election was going to be tight and they didn't want the distraction. There was consideration of doing it earlier this year, but the Washington and Pacific trips crowded that out. And the Prime Minister was really keen to have this at a moment when there would not be weeks of lead-up speculation about who was invited and who was not. He was invited to Kyle Sandilands' wedding. Would Kyle Sandilands come to this one? There were no written invites, so they couldn't be leaked. And there was a huge level of secrecy around it, in part because of security advice that there might be death threats and other unwanted characters around. And I'm not questioning that advice in any way. We do live in a time of heightened security risk, but that level of secrecy did help the Prime Minister politically because he was able to keep this under wraps. Honeymoon Monday, there you go.
And yeah, there's not too many venues, I suppose, you can therefore choose on those security grounds if you're the Prime Minister. Claudia, as I mentioned, what a year he's had. And what a way to finish it with a wedding. Even the rain held off late yesterday.
He keeps having a good run, doesn't he? I mean, the record election win, the rain holding off at the wedding, getting the EPBC Act, all sorted, done and dusted. It does cap off a pretty good year for him.
Let's get into that EPBC then. Back to the politics. Karen, I just made the point there. It's interesting that pre-election they didn't go with the Greens on these laws. Tanya Plibersek was the minister at the time. Now they have, but as Murray Watt kept saying, we've got two options. We can go with the coalition, we can go with the Greens. Why did they go with the Greens?
Well, I think they were wanting the pressure up on both sides. They wanted both sides to be at the table and negotiating hard. I think it suits the government to go with the Greens. I mean, they have got a constituency on their own left flank that has expectations, and there is, that would be potentially more difficult if they'd ended up going with the coalition. What they've done, and the Greens fought hard and, drove a hard bargain. You'll remember before the last election, the Greens were ready to do a deal, but it didn't suit the Prime Minister to do a deal before the election with anyone. After the election, yes, they've made this agreement. I think he's happy with where they've landed and they've left the coalition in a mess. And what he has done is he's inserted in that deal and insisted on it some of the aspects of what the coalition were asking for on behalf of business. So now business gets a little bit of a prize. They don't get everything they want, but they've got some things, but they don't give the credit to the coalition. The credit doesn't go to the coalition. And then, there are now some people in business really saying, well,
where were they?
These are our traditional great defenders, but they're not delivering. I had one, business leader describe it as a political masterclass from the Prime Minister and his Environment Minister.
I'll come back to the coalition, but for the Greens here too, Claudia, I mean, Sarah Hanson-Young led their negotiations. She did ultimately agree, as Karen says, to a couple of those things that business wanted, but they also got for the Greens benefits for native forests.
And no fast track on coal and gas projects, and that key, with one of the key things being that fast tracking side of the new changes. And I think for the Greens too, one of the key benefits here, particularly if you look at seats in the inner city that they are wanting to win or win back in some cases that they've since lost to Labor, there's a lot of older voters in particular in those seats who, you know, when you talk to them in places like Melbourne, which you would think would be strong for the Greens, people still remember things like the CPRS from many, many years ago, particularly in those older age demographics. And, you know, when you ask people about this, people who you would think would be a typical affluent Greens voter, to be perfectly honest, they'll bring up this idea of the Greens being obstructionist. And that was a really key image problem for them at the last election. I think it really did play into what we saw with them losing some of their seats. And I think for Larissa Waters and Sarah Hanson-Young, this helps ease that image a little bit, because to the Greens, this isn't perfect legislation. They still have a lot of criticisms of it, but they're getting it through. They look like the cooperative partner. And also, I think Karen has written about this as well this week. It also further weakens the coalition. They've upset a key constituency in business. So the Prime Minister and the government have really won politically on both of those.
And that might have implications for donations to the Liberal Party going forward as well.
They've been out of step with big business for a long time.
Yeah.
So what happened with the coalition, Paul? I mean, the criticism from the government is they were all over the shop. They had too many people involved in the negotiations, 3 at least, and it was all a bit confusing. They kept making more demands. Is that what happened?
Yeah, it's partly true. I think the Prime Minister has intentionally cut out Angie Bell and Susan Lee from his public statements about how the negotiations went, in part to diminish the opposition leader and the responsible minister, to create the sense that there was chaos on the coalition side.
So he praised John O'Doniam, who's the Shadow Home Affairs Minister, who was brought in to negotiate. Why was he brought in?
Well, Duniam was the previous Environment Shadow last term. He's a senator, so he has a relationship with Murray Watt. He'd been hearing from Watt and others for weeks now that it was not clear what the coalition wanted in this deal, what the coalition's red lines were, how far they were willing to go. So over time, Susan Lee's office allowed John O'Doniam, who's seen as a safe pair of hands, can speak to both the left and right of the Liberal Party and has a kind of level of decorum, and he's a classic senator.
Where does that leave the Shadow Minister?
It leaves the Shadow Minister and Susan Lee's office in a really precarious position, because it's another proof point to the coalition party room that there is not this authority at the top of the opposition to act decisively in Parliament, to do what Peter Dutton did on the NDIS and aged care and electoral reform, and have one-on-one communication with the Prime Minister. This does expose the fact that there is no relationship between Susan Lee and Anthony Albanese. It's quite odd. They barely acknowledge each other.
I think this is an interesting point. I think this is an interesting point, and there's conflicting from both of them arguments as to who contacted who and who ignored who.
Yeah,
bottom line,
they say opposing things about that.
You sent me a text. I tried to have a meeting with you. Anyway, whatever happened, they're not talking, Karen, and certainly Albanese and Dutton did regularly.
I think Paul's right that the government is seeking to encourage the view that this is a chaotic opposition and that it's unstable. And I think, you know, Susan Lee was in an impossible position, really, because if they had done a deal, they wouldn't have got everything that they wanted. And the right flank of their party and their supporters, the ones who are looking at One Nation, they would accuse them of kowtowing to the Greenies and creating a new terrible Environment Protection Agency. So, you know, she was really up against it, and now the government is just, you know, it has been a masterclass. They've just poured on the pressure, even setting this arbitrary deadline, which made this look like a drama. You know, we're all following it day by day by day.
Will they get there?
There was a terrible inflation figure in the middle of all that, and terrible emissions reduction, all of these figures, but they got swamped by this issue. Will we have a deal or will we not?
I'll tell you who is perhaps most critical of the coalition, Graham Samuel, the guy who ran the review of the EPBC Act back when Susan Lee was the Environment Minister.
There's been a whole series of obfuscation, obstruction, contradictions. You've really wondered what it's been all about. I think what the coalition's unfortunately done, I say so with some sadness, they've talked themselves into irrelevancy.
Well, Susan Lee, for her part, though, fired up as this was, well, it had already passed through the Senate and was passing back through the House of Representatives, fired up saying these changes are going to wreck the economy.
This is economy wrecking, Mr. Speaker. The amendments are economy wrecking. After a disastrous year of no delivery, with inflation and interest rates rising, we had to have this. Shame on this government for letting down the people of this country who pay the bills.
Look, there's mixed views amongst the business groups. Some of them are happy, some of them say missed opportunity. I don't think any of them are saying it's going to wreck the economy, though, are they?
No, not that I've seen or heard. I mean, it does certainly again, it sort of plays into these issues that we've been talking about, where clearly the opposition and the opposition leader are under pressure from the government. I mean, to be frank, the last thing that any opposition leader would want going into Christmas and the New Year would be the kind of leadership talk and things that we've been hearing around the opposition leader, because even if that isn't the case, even if people aren't looking at it right now, it is the sort of thing that hangs around and doesn't go away. And it can make it... No, you go. But
no, please.
It can make it, it's as Anthony Albanese has ended the year on a high, such a high that he's even getting married, I think Susan Lee is ending it on a little bit of a low at the moment.
I was just going to add to your point in terms of where Susan Lee is at. It's worth stripping away the details of how this negotiation plays out. Her office and her have for weeks been at the worst end of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They're thinking about life and death. They're not thinking of how to pass a tricky piece of legislation that risks a fight. And if you look at the other side of the equation, the coalition was not alive, it was not alert enough to the prospect of a Greens deal. The Greens did not want to oppose this bill. They would have been accused of the same thing they did on the CPRS. And there's a unique relationship between Murray Watt and Sarah Hanson-Young. They door-knocked on doors in Florida in Barack Obama's re-election campaign in 2012.
Is that right?
They get along really well.
I didn't know that.
And just worth mentioning on the government side how important this bill is. We've talked so much about the politics, but they can now start talking about their housing agenda, their renewables agenda and their critical minerals agenda without this massive handbrake that this bill provides. So huge for the government.
Slow approvals for all of these things.
And the truth is as well, the government always wanted to go, or thought the Greens was the most likely option, and they knew that by building up the prospect of a coalition deal...
Well, I can tell you, some Labor MPs, certainly those in parts of the country where they are under some pressure from the Greens, were very fearful of doing a deal with the coalition. They knew that that would give the Greens, the environment groups, something to go after them on. Look, just quickly on emissions, you mentioned the emissions data, Karen. We should note it. With the latest quarterly figures during the week showed the best annual reduction in emissions, down 2.2%. We're pretty much on track to hit the 2030 target, but not the 2035 target. We're way off. Further steps are going to be required, and this won't be necessarily politically easy.
No, I think it's going to be very difficult. I mean, I suppose in the government's favour, we saw the Australian Election Survey, annual election survey, the survey that comes out after federal elections this week, that listed the issues that people had ranked, and cost of living was here, and then daylight, and then a whole lot of others. And I think climate change came in like number 7. It was about half as significant as it was at the last election. So they'll be hoping that people are, on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs point, more focused on economic matters and and energy and that sort of thing, which won't necessarily, that'll also be tricky for them. But if it is portrayed as this government can't do what it says it would do, and it's failing us, then it's problematic politically for them, I think.
Yeah, no, exactly. All right, well, time to talk to Nationals leader David Littleproud to take us there. Here was his colleague Matt Canavan on Barnaby Joyce's decision to quit the party.
We can't afford to keep losing people. Yeah, we've had a great record as a party at general elections. We haven't lost a lower house seat at a general election since 2007 in the Nationals Party. It's a long time now, but we have lost 3 members to defections in the last 3 years. And we can't keep doing that. So, look, it's ultimately rests on the captain of the team, David, to reach out and try and do the best we can, because we don't want to lose people.
David Littleproud, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So what do you think? Will you try to win back Barnaby Joyce, or is it good riddance?
Oh, look, obviously he hasn't joined One Nation. It's disappointing that he's broken a contract with the National Party, and while he didn't sit in the National Party room for the last 4 or 5 weeks, that's not something that's unusual. We've had other members that have done that, but the fact that he's taken a significant step to walk away from the membership, from the people who put him there, that invested their time for no financial gain, but their belief in our movement. And our movement is bigger than any individual. It's about the collective and about those that those members that have put us there. So look, Barnaby hasn't joined One Nation, but he's made a significant step, and my door's always open, phone's always on. I have no animosity towards Barnaby Joyce. I never have. The reality is he's made a decision after the fact that I challenged him after the 22 elections, as did Darren Chester. I won. I kept him on the front bench and made it clear after the 25 election that there were others that needed to step up and to give opportunity, like Ross Cadell, who's done a fantastic job in helping Matt Canavan land our emissions policy. and be able to make sure that we have a future for the party. And that hasn't sat well with Barnaby. I accept that, but unfortunately, when you're leader, as he did, you have to make tough decisions about who's in the team. But we can all still make a contribution when you're in the team. And I think if you look at what we've done for the last 3.5 years, what we have achieved, we've set the national agenda on the voice, on nuclear energy, on divestiture, and now on emissions policies. And, you know, obviously we lost Andrew G because of our position on the voice, and Jacinta Price left because of ambition. She wants to be Prime Minister. I can never be Prime Minister. That sits with me, but what I sit with is the ability to be able to influence policy at a national level and through the coalition. I think, as one of your commentators said to me recently, it probably hasn't been since the McEwen era that we've seen a more influential national party in the national stage, but also in setting coalition policy, and I'm proud of the team that's achieved that.
All right, well, just on the point you make that he's broken a contract. I mean, he was elected 7 months ago as a Nationals MP for New England. He's now not going to sit as a Nationals MP. Should he quit the quit the parliament so that there can be a by-election there?
Well, I mean, obviously that's a decision for Barnaby Joyce to make, and he needs to reflect on the decision he's. Well, I mean, obviously we want to make sure that the people in New England are represented with the contract that they signed up to. But ultimately,
which was for a Nationals MP, right?
So
should he go so that there can be another Nationals MP?
Well, that's a decision under the law for Barnaby Joyce to make, not for me to make. Right. My job is to focus on the future and to continue to articulate what our party has achieved, and whether that be through the voice right through to emissions policies, something that Barnaby himself was very passionate about.
So you'll leave it to him as to whether he should quit the parliament between now and the election. In the Labor Party, if you do this, you're labelled a rat. Is Barnaby Joyce a rat from your perspective?
Oh, look, I don't think commentary from the sideline helps anybody. I'm focused on moving forward as a party room and continue to build on the wins that we've created. I think that's what the Australian people expect. They expect a level of leadership and maturity from their politicians that I don't think we've seen for some time, and I don't intend to get into that. I intend to focus on continuing to make sure we shape coalition policy. And I'd rather be able to focus and draw the collective wisdom of my party room to continue to lead this country and the debate in this country. That's what we've shown, the level of maturity and leadership I don't think we've seen from too many others. And I see that the Labor Party, when they lost the senator recently, they were pretty vicious. I'll let the Australian people make up their mind, and normally they don't like people who leave a party and go to another one, but that's the beauty of our democracy, David.
It sounds
ultimately
to me,
there's a judgment, and the Australian people get.
It sounds to me, listening to you this morning, that you're not, taking the gloves off when it comes to Barnaby Joyce. You're not saying he should quit the parliament. You're not, using names about whether you call him a rat or whatever. Are you worried about the threat he may pose should he go to One Nation?
You never take anything for granted in politics, David, but I think the Nationals, and our polling shows this, the Nationals are holding up very strong in terms of our votes since the election, because we've taken the time to get policy right. We could have taken the populist path and just said no to net zero, but we had to say why we were saying no and what we were going to. And I think we've landed an eminently sensible policy of a cheaper, better, fairer way to reduce emissions than Labor's $9 trillion net zero plan. I think we've shown eminent sense in how we get to that point. And I think that's what the Australian people are listening to, is the common sense that the Nationals take to Canberra.
I don't want to get bogged down on the net zero thing, but because you keep mentioning this $9 trillion plan, I do need to point out that figure, which, as you know, comes from the Net Zero Australia project. They have said it's a misrepresentation. The more accurate figure, they say, is $300 billion. In fact, they say we expect small impacts on average household energy costs, maybe even small reductions if you include car ownership, a finding that should temper some of the fear-mongering. Do you need to stop using that $9 trillion figure now?
No, David, because if you do go into their comments and you look at it, and what they do say is that number is what will need to be invested and while the $300 billion might come directly from Australian taxpayers, there will be a lot of foreign investment that will be required. Now, David, I don't know whether you live in some magical land in Australia that thinks that someone's going to spend $9 trillion and not expect that money back nor a return on that investment. That goes through the economy, from energy right through to transport, all the way through.
Yeah,
so that is a cost.
They've said the $9 trillion includes, as you say, foreign investment in getting things like the green hydrogen industry off the ground. No, but they've said that $9 trillion includes foreign investors building, green hydrogen export facilities in Australia, things that may not happen now.
Someone's always got to pay, David.
Yeah, okay.
Someone's always got to pay, David. I don't know what magical land you live in, but Australia's no different to anyone else. If you can find someone that can drop a lazy trillion into Maranoa, I'll take it.
Just trying to stick to the facts.
Just trying to have to get a return.
Make sure the viewers are aware that the people who said that $9 trillion say it's a big misrepresentation and it shouldn't be used. But anyway, let's come back to One Nation.
No, well, it's not a misrepresentation.
Well, that's what they say.
It's not a misrepresentation.
Okay, that's what they say, the authors of that number. Let's turn to immigration. One Nation wants to cap net overseas migration at 130,000 places a year. Do you think that's a good idea?
Well, we'll get to our number and we're working through that again. You can go for the headlines or you can take the time, 2.5 years before an election, to get the policy right. And what we want to do is have a migration policy that works for Australia. We're giving the greatest gift we can give to any person on this planet, a ticket to Australia. What we've seen over the last 3.5 years is a government that's prioritised dog groomers and martial arts instructors instead of prioritising some builders, electricians, plumbers, roofers, tilers that might be able to help in our supply. We need to make sure we get a migration policy that slows down to buy some time to allow building some homes and to have the skills to be able to do that. And I think this is the opportunity that's been lost, where we have to make some tough decisions, and we'll have to recast that in making sure that we do have a very close lens on the skills that we need, and particularly in regional Australia, David, I've got to say, out here we're still looking for skilled labour. We still need those skills to come in. We had the ag visa ripped away from us by the Albanese government, but it's broader than that, and that's why we need to make sure we have a migration policy that determines who comes to this country, how many we have, what skills they have, and where we want them to live.
Do you want more migrants in regional Australia?
Well, in parts, David, there is a skill shortage, and this is where, when you are giving the greatest ticket you can give to anyone on this planet, why wouldn't you pull the levers that don't cost the Australian taxpayer anything to make sure that you're bringing them with the visa settings that ensure that they come and live and bring their skills to the areas where we need them. And to give you a perfect example of that, that's what the ag visa was about, David. They could come work in agriculture for 4 or 5 years. Once they laid down roots, then they could have their pathway to permanent residency. That's about bringing the next generation of migrants to Australia, and particularly regional Australia, to build regional Australia. But when you can do that and pull the right levers, you can do that without costing the taxpayer anything, and that's where some common sense needs to prevail.
So will that be part of the coalition's...
you'll see from us.
Yeah, will that be part of the coalition's policy? Bring back the agriculture visa, bring more migrants through that to regional Australia?
Well, it's broader than the ag visa, David. Just understand that where we need doctors, we need nurses and physios right through to town planners across much of regional Australia, and that's why this rich tapestry of immigration and where it goes is one that it's important that you just don't.
So how do you do that? How do you get doctors and town planners into regional Australia?
Well, that's about saying to them you can come over on your visa and living in a particular area. Invest in it. We do that already, David, under the meat workers agreements, where we can bring them in. I've got about 160 Vietnamese in Charleville, and they are model citizens living out there. They're the first to work, they're the first to church on Sunday, they're not hanging out of the pubs causing fights on a Friday night, and their kids are the captains and the duxes of the school, and they're revered Australian, or hopefully new Australians that have laid down roots there. So there are already existing levers you can pull, and I think that's where you have to look at the complexity of this and the problems we're trying to solve. But just pouring people broadly into Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, you're living with that experience, and your children are losing hope. And this is where we need to let state and local governments build supply and get supply back in as quickly as we can. And that means the lever that the federal government can pull the most is, in fact, on migration and how we do it and who we bring in.
What do you think about this idea of some sort of values test for people who are coming on temporary visas There's already the citizenship test for people who want to become citizens. But if you're coming on a temporary visa, on any of these visas you're talking about, do you think there should be some sort of values test? Is that a problem at the moment?
I don't think it hurts. I think it actually adds to the value and demonstrates the value of citizenship in this country and what our forefathers have built, the values and principles of freedom of speech. But with that comes a responsibility. And when you've seen the discord on the streets, particularly of Sydney and Melbourne, over the last two years since October 2023, I mean, I think there is a risk that we as Australians can't import the hate that permeates in some other parts of the world. And I think it's important we make sure that when we do bring people from those challenged parts of the world, that they understand they're coming here with a responsibility to live up to the values and principles that our great country has been built on, which is migration, but how we have come together to be able to achieve a harmonious society for most of it, and not allow that hate that permeates in some parts of the world to be imported in. And I think that's about setting the standards, making sure those standards are fully made aware to those that want to come to this country. I think that's what most Australians expect their government to set those standards to those that are bringing in, to make sure we can enjoy what we've got and not erode what we've got.
I want to ask you about the environment law changes that passed through the Parliament during the week, particularly the impact on farmers there in Queensland. Land clearing within 50 metres of a Great Barrier Reef catchment will no longer be exempt from the federal law. Farmers, in other words, will now need to have approval for land clearing in these areas. Do you have a problem with that?
Well, they already do, David, and this is a cheap political point-scoring exercise by Murray Watt and the government to try and demonise farmers, to make it sound as though they're out there clearing land every day. It is illegal to clear native vegetation in any state and territory in this country. In fact, that's how we met our Kyoto Protocol targets. Vegetation management laws were put in every state. So farmers don't go and undertake tree clearing. The only tree clearing that's reported now is the management of the regrowth of the areas that they're allowed to farm. And so I think it's important that the Australian public understand farmers are being demonised here. They are the best stewards of our environment. I used to be a rural banker doing cash flows around farmers' tables, mate. I can tell you, after you've done the budget, you drive around the Hilux, you could see who was flogging their country and who wasn't, and whether the budgets were going to work. They know that the health of the environment of what they manage is intrinsically tied to their profit and loss. And I just think Murray Watt has taken a step too far here in demonising farms and try to say to the rest of the Australian people that farmers are out there clearing timber every day. For someone that used to be an ag minister and is now the environment minister, it's abhorrent.
Well, just on the point you make, I mean, there's the change on catchments in relation to the Great Barrier Reef, but then nationally the other change in this law on regrowth, which you mentioned, you can no longer just clear that regrowth if it's 15 years old or older. You obviously have a big problem with this. Would you seek to repeal those changes?
Yeah, and obviously you've got to get a Senate that'll work with you, but there are a number of these changes within the law and also in forestry area as well. All we're going to do is to say we can put our head in a pillow at night, close our eyes and think, oh, well, it's okay, we'll import timber from Indonesia and other parts of the world that don't have our environmental standards. We take 1 in 14,000 trees in a native forest. It's sustainably managed, and we're going to say, well, it's okay, go and burn up Indonesia and just so we can have timber for our houses here. You've got to understand it's a bigger world, more complex.
But in terms of Australia, I mean, the State of Environment report does say land clearing is a major threat to endangered species. You don't accept that?
No, David. I think what you'll find, particularly where I live, I've got the lived experience. Out here, there's no one tearing up the vegetation recklessly. They're managing regrowth so that they can produce your food and fibre, so that you don't have a cost of living crisis. In fact, when I was in government as the Ag Minister, I introduced a biodiversity program that rewarded them not just for abating carbon but for improving biodiversity. And all this government's trying to do is this reckless race to try and achieve emissions reductions, because They know that they're falling desperately short, and they're going to do it at anyone's expense, and that's ultimately going to come back to the checkout. It's going to come back to your cost, but we're locking up farmers. We've already lost 7.2 million hectares, and we're going to lose another 5.1 million hectares of arable agricultural land because of this reckless race to what the government wants to achieve in emissions reductions.
Finally, David Littleproud, the prime ministerial wedding. You and the PM, despite your political differences, actually get on. Do you have any well wishes for the happy couple?
Yeah, I'm genuinely happy for him. You know, it's great to see, and it's great to see the PM's got someone that loves him and is going to be with him. It's a tough job and it's a lonely job, let alone being Prime Minister. So I couldn't be happier for the PM and Jodie. And I've got to say, Jodie has already stepped up on the international stage and represented us in such a classy way for some time. And now they've solidified their partnership with marriage, and I think good on him. I hope he has a bit of a break now. I think we all need a break, but good on him, and I wish him every happiness. I couldn't be happier for the pair of them.
A touching note to finish on. David Littleproud, thanks so much for joining us this morning. All right, well, coming up, we'll get to the inflation figures that we touched on earlier. They're not such great news for the government this week. First, let's get back to our panel. We're joined once more by Karen Middleton, Sakkal and Claudia Long. Barnaby, Joyce. Karen, what did you think just then of David Littleproud and the approach he's taking to someone who has caused the party a lot of grief?
Well, they want to stop him taking that next step, don't they? And
still some hope there, do you think?
Well, you know, we've seen this sort of full court press of his colleagues in the last few days saying, don't do it, Barnaby. Yes, you've taken this step and left the Nats. Don't go the next step. You're welcome back any time. So I think they recognise that he has hesitated. He hasn't gone that full step, and they're very keen to stop him doing that. I mean, and there's a lot of emphasis on trashing. I think Bridget McKenzie's been talking about trashing his legacy. They're sort of behind their hands pointing to people like Mark Latham and saying, you know, do you want to end up like that? You've got a legacy you should be proud of. Don't end your political life in a different place.
Look, the wedding photos are obviously images of the week, but so were these, the images of the other, well, I was going to say happy couple, maybe I'm stretching the analogy too far, Pauline Hanson, Barnaby Joyce sitting down for a steak dinner on the sandwich press of all things, and the steaks from Gina Reinhardt's cattle company, cut in little shapes of Australia. There you go. Before we get to the will he, won't he go to One Nation, what's going on with the sandwich press? Does anyone have strong views about cooking steaks on a sandwich press?
I mean, I'm neither here nor there about how you cook your steak, but I think, you know, we talked about political masterclass before. This is an attention masterclass. We wouldn't be talking about this so much if they'd just gone to a restaurant. You know, this is the sandwich press is the point because it keeps us all talking about it even still. And both of these politicians are good at getting attention, you know, and I think that's a key part of this whole thing. You know, Barnaby, for his part, has repeatedly said publicly that he didn't want to draw this out. He wanted to do it at the end of the sitting week to not have a big circus. Whether or not it was the intention, the impact of that has actually been to draw it out even longer over, I mean, if you count him saying he wasn't going to run again, that's months, but even just this week when we've all kind of known this was going to happen and then it's lasted the whole week, we're still talking about it. It really is all about as many eyeballs, I think, as possible.
It did the job. It did the job. But has he really not decided, Paul, when you look at those images, when you look at the fact that Barnaby Joyce was even defending Pauline Hanson's burqa stunt, this looks very much like he has made a decision, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolute crime against Wagyu steak.
I agree.
We've just witnessed. Putting that to one side. He has pretty much made his mind up. The plan's been talked about between himself and James Ashby and Pauline Hanson for months now. He even talked about how he wants to be a senator again. He talked about why these populist wins behind Marine Le Pen and Nigel Farage and the Italian leader and the MAGA movement mean that there is something new happening in the electorate. So he's not doing anything to tamp down the expectation that he will move on. I think what will be fascinating in the next year or so is whether Barnaby Joyce starts talking about One Nation as not just an outside disruptor that might pick up a seat or two, but in the same way as Nigel Farage speaks now about replacing the Conservatives, whether Barnaby Joyce will start trying to transform One Nation into something that is more than just a party of stunts. And I think Pauline Hanson caused him to spend a couple of days thinking about his next step, because she proved this week that One Nation is still a party of stunts and is still a party still driven by racial motivation.
His language on One Nation has certainly changed over the years. Take a look at this. Back in 2017, when Pauline Hanson likened Islam to a disease, here's what Barnaby Joyce said at the time.
I've got good mates, not so good mates who are Islamic. I'm going to walk up to them and say, I'm sorry, we've got a person who thinks you're a disease. They say, no, I'm a human being. And this bat poo crazy stuff does not help anybody.
Bat poo crazy stuff. It is quite a different tone now, Karen.
It is. I mean, Pauline Hanson has also been talking about becoming a party of government and not just being a fringe party. But at the same time, what is she doing to achieve that? Stunts. It's not policy development or any substantive contribution to governing. It's stunts. So the words say one thing, but the actions do something different.
Just on those comments, from those old comments, Bridget McKenzie, who's the Nationals leader in the Senate, this week said that, I don't think Barnaby Joyce will fit in One Nation because, to quote her, he's not racist.
Yeah.
And I think if you listen to David Littleproud there, he was reluctant to answer your questions about whether Barnaby was a rat. That's because Littleproud's under huge pressure inside his party to keep Barnaby in the tent. People like Bridget McKenzie and Matt Canavan see Barnaby Joyce as a political father. And Matt Canavan this week, who's a really sharp strategist, Matt Canavan, came into the Senate and thought Barnaby, despite being a person who he loves, is now our enemy. He could start tearing at our base in the regions, costing us seats to Labor if they reduce the Nationals' primary vote in some areas. And he went fully on the attack on Joyce.
I thought that was really significant.
Yeah, it was a big moment.
And that will only increase once he makes it official.
And he's the closest to Barnaby Joyce in the building, well, has been.
He worked for him, he's his friend.
Yeah, he went harder than what we just heard from David Littleproud, I thought, who was far more careful, I think.
Well, Littleproud doesn't want Canavan and McKenzie to feel like he's pushing Joyce out. There's a lot of tension inside the National Party this week. When he gave his 90-second statement just before question time, there were a few Nats at the front, sitting in the front bench. Joyce was up the back in the ejector seat, as he described it. There was Darren Chester, Kevin Hogan, I think Pat Conahan, all of whom are Littleproud's guys. And Canavan and others believe that there was an embrace among some of these guys after Joyce left the chamber, as in, finally, we've got rid of this guy, which is causing a lot of anger.
There's a sentiment, particularly in the Liberal Party, on the moderate side, that they're happy.
Not all of them are sad to see him go.
And some of them are even saying maybe we should have stayed split from the Nats just for a bit longer.
Just quickly, before we go on to inflation, immigration, you've had Andrew Bragg out there, who is the Shadow Minister for Housing, saying it's economically and morally wrong to blame the housing problem on migrants. You've had Susan Lee saying it's an infrastructure problem, not about any migrants. You've got John O'Doniam saying we've got to have this values test. David Littleproud saying we need more migrants in the regions and ways to, steer them to the regions. It's all getting a little bit complicated, I think, Karen.
I think they have to be very careful with this debate. They're obviously reflecting, on the opposition side, reflecting a sentiment that exists, and that has to be, people do have to, they can't suppress it. I don't think suppressing this issue is going to work for either government or opposition. But we've seen what happens when people with more extreme views feel like they have permission to start attacking migrants. It then becomes particular groups of migrants. We saw what Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price said and how that went. They have to be careful that they don't repeat the kind of thing they did with China on COVID. Chinese Australians then got persecuted, got furious, and then that has its own electoral consequences for the party. So in brutal political terms, you have to be super careful. The government's challenge is to try and find a way to address people's fears and concerns with facts. Not allow the fueling of this looking for someone to blame, let's blame the people who came from somewhere else. We know historically in Australia, it's a very hard debate to have in a moderate, clear-headed way, but I think they all should be striving for that, and I worry that on the opposition side, we're just looking for inflammation.
We'll see where they land in the coming weeks. Look, inflation, it has edged higher. Take a look at the latest figures. Headline and underlying inflation both crept up. They're above the Reserve Bank's target zone. The headline rate up at 3.8. And 3.3 for underlying inflation. It's above the Reserve Bank's target zone and clearly above the government's comfort zone.
We do acknowledge that the through-the-year number was higher than we'd like it to be, but driven partly by temporary factors like the removal of state energy rebates.
Some economists are even talking about interest rates now going up as a result of all of this. How worried is the government, do you think, about that prospect?
Quite. Sorry, that's a very short answer, isn't it? Yeah. But look, I mean, they're already laying the groundwork for this. They're saying that next May is going to be obviously a pretty big budget for them and they're going to have to make some tough choices. We've already seen them talking about efficiencies in the public service as well. Now, they're saying that that's not about job cuts. There's a bit of fear, though, in the public service, particularly after what's been going on at the CSIRO as well, which has definitely caught, I think, the eye of a lot of people who are not necessarily always engaged in politics, but who do know what the CSIRO is and about and does. And so I think that's going to be potentially a problem for the government, is, you know, either easing that fear or having to make some pretty tough choices for, again, a key constituency for Labor, particularly in Canberra. One
of the tough choices they have to make immediately ahead of that May budget is what to do with their own energy rebate. Jim Chalmers there referred to the state rebates coming off and how that's seen inflation bounce up. Their own household energy rebate is currently due to end at the end of December. What do they do here, Paul? What's the thinking at the moment within the government?
The thinking at the moment is that they don't want to extend it. There's a chance that changes between now and May EFO, but I don't think it will. It costs too much and states are bringing their own rebates off. I mean, the politics of the economy at the moment are potentially diabolical next year for the government. The deficit might be about $35 billion. Government spending is the highest outside the pandemic for decades. Interest rates are not going down. They're not likely to go down next year much at all, and they might actually go up. That's all pretty precarious for a government that also has a huge productivity problem. The productivity problem means that the economy can't grow quick, really, without fueling inflation. So they've got to make some big changes.
Yeah, on that rebate, I spoke for the podcast this week to Chris Richardson, the independent economist, and Aruna Sathnapalli from the Grattan Institute. Chris Richardson always has a great turn of phrase. He's not a fan, to put it mildly, of this household energy rebate and thinks it should be coming to an end.
It is pure political pork, about as crispy as it comes. So I hate it, right? And nor does it actually help on inflation.
Bit of free advice there for the government, what it should do here. It's not easy, though, taking money away from...
Never. But, you know, it's not if you do it, it's when you do it, because you just can't keep these subsidies forever. You know, I agree with Paul that I think the sentiment is moving towards let's just do it and get it over with. It's the old rip the Band-Aid off thing. The second year of a parliamentary term is traditionally the tough love year. That's if a government's going to make hard decisions politically to try and save money, that's when they do it. That they're going to have economic pressure increasing. The closer they get to the next election, the less inclined they're going to be to try and claw it back, but they need the money. They can't afford it. So I think we'll see it probably in the end come off sooner, and then next year's budget's going to be really interesting for all the reasons.
And just quickly on the public service cuts that you referenced there, Claudia, I just want to show you what Katie Gallagher has said this morning on Sky News, because the Financial Review reported this week departments have all been asked to come up with suggested savings of 5%. But Katie Gallagher's comment this morning was that, yeah, look, there might be some swings and roundabouts, but the overall size of the public service won't be changing.
There will be ups and downs across the public service, you know, as has always been the case. But I think the size it is now is roughly the size that it should remain.
Yeah, which means they won't be finding big savings out of the public service, which is interesting.
Yeah, and the politics of this is super tricky for the government because they went to the election casting Peter Dutton as a villainous cutter, and he handled the politics of his potential public service cuts terribly. But it's awkward for Labor because they've come into government, they've come into their second term and realised something does have to give. It reminds me a bit of state Labor campaigns in various state elections. Labor goes to elections casting the opposition as nasty, and they'll cut every kind of service under the sun, and then they get into government and they realise we actually need to cut back a bit. Yeah. Like in Victoria, where they said we can build the SRL and build hospitals and schools, we can do it all, but now they can't fund Gonski and they're cutting hospital funding.
And if it's tricky for the government, it's super, super tricky for Katie Gallagher, Minister for Finance from the ACT, under pressure from David Pocock and his independent push. So she's got another vested interest in trying to calm the horses at the heart of the public service.
Which I think is why that comment this morning is quite interesting. Social media, we're less than 2 weeks away from the social media age limit coming into effect on December 10 for all the families out there, just to remind them. But now, Claudia, there's a High Court challenge going on. What's this about?
So it's been brought by two teenagers who are supported by a digital freedom project that's led by a New South Wales Libertarian MP. So there's a bit of the background, and there's two 15-year-olds who have brought this case. Now, we're not sure yet if it's actually going to be heard, I believe, by the High Court. The government don't seem particularly worried about it. It wouldn't actually necessarily be, like, none of this would really kick off potentially until after this ban is already begun, is my understanding. Interestingly, we heard from a former High Court Justice, Robert French, on a similar proposal put forward in South Australia, and he said that I'm just going to read it because I'm not a legal eagle. He said that the implied freedom of political communication would not seem to be engaged here because it's content neutral, right? It's not about stopping a particular type of content, like political content and communication. It's everything, whether it's like makeup tutorials, whether it's, I don't know, car videos, whether it's whatever else teenagers like to look at on social media. So I think that's a key part of whether or not this could actually succeed, but the government don't seem particularly worried about it.
It's an interesting question though, Karen, isn't it? Because as Claudia says, this comes, the challenges on the grounds, this is stopping the kids' implied right to political communication.
Which begs the question, what's the definition of political communication? Is it capital P political in the way that Claudia was just talking about? Or is it discussion and debate between people? Also, we're talking about children. Does that right extend to children or only to adults? I don't know if that's been tested. I'm not a legal eagle either. So there are a lot of layers to this. But when the court will have to decide if there is a practical impact in terms of political communication. And that's not just about will people be affected by the ban, but it goes to this very issue of, well, is political communication being suppressed, or have they got other ways to communicate that it can still flow?
Just very quickly, Paul, is the coalition getting wobbly in its support of the ban on kids?
Well, I saw Melissa McIntosh, the communications shadow, has seemed to suggest that she has concerns about the practical effect of the change. I saw Andrew Bragg, the senator on X, Twitter this week, saying we never signed up to YouTube being part of this ban. YouTube is not social media. That was done by regulation, not the legislation that was passed. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see a bit of a breakout from some coalition MPs questioning how this ban works. They won't oppose the principle of the ban because it actually came from Peter Dutton
first came up with it.
But it wouldn't be surprised me if you saw some breakouts from some more libertarian elements of the coalition.
Interesting to note. All right, our panel, Claudia Long, Paul Sakkal and Karen Middleton will be back very shortly with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mark Bowers and I'm photographer at large for the New Daily. I'm talking pictures after a hectic last week of Parliament with photographer for the Sydney Morning Herald and Age, Alex Ellinghausen. A very warm welcome, mate.
Good morning, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
What a week. The government's environment protection laws finally got the green slide.
I know.
David Pope has picked up on this beautifully with the Prime Minister negotiating with Larissa here and the menagerie outside.
I know.
Yeah. How we humans sit here wrangling over our impact on nature.
While outside the wildlife carries on with its own dramas, oblivious.
Here's Barnaby as the rooster, I think, with Pauline on his back. And
is that what it is?
Well, it's got the rooster fantail. Littleproud is a bit of a duck, I think.
This is a kookaburra?
Yeah, Angus the kookaburra. Very good. The person who had a 1,000-watt smile all week was Murray Watt.
And a skip in his step. The government were happy to get the deal done with the Greens, and you always hear the word from the other side, it's a dirty deal.
It's a dirty deal, yeah.
But, I mean, when you actually watch the negotiations play out during all the divisions, they're consulting with each other the entire time. Katie Gallagher, Sarah Hanson-Young, Murray Watt.
It always reaffirms my sense of democracy when you can see it all happening. It was a really febrile atmosphere in Parliament as the coalition thought they were on to win, going after Chris Bowen.
Yeah, with regards to his new role, the new COP President of Negotiations.
It's not often you get the double thumbs down.
No, and you could tell that every time he got up to the dispatch box, that was where their main attacks were being directed.
The volume level just sort of went up. David Littleproud is very emotive during question time, as well as Dan Tehan and Ted O'Brien.
Yeah, there's definitely a very animated front bench on the opposition at the moment.
There was a moment when the lights went down. There was a power outage and the opposition all pulled out their camera phones like they were at a concert.
Yeah, oh look, there definitely was a little bit of theatre involved in this. Like, the lights went out, but the chamber was not in pitch darkness.
No.
But more and more of them started doing it, and that's when you switch to the wide angle lens to try to capture the entire chamber to show what's happening.
Yeah. Angus Taylor has a very emotive face in question time. It's not hard to work out what he's thinking.
Very expressive.
Yeah. Susan Lee's performance this week was like she sort of sat on the sidelines.
The leadership speculation that's swirling around, there's a lot of intense focus on her at the moment.
And Pauline Hanson, she pulled out the burqa and wore it into the Senate.
And you saw the rebuke from her Senate colleagues, including, Senator Penny Wong and Senator Ann Ruston.
Lydia Thorpe was very strong in her condemnation, and I felt sorry for Fatima to have her faith mocked in that way.
Look at the expression on Senator Waters. That says it all.
Yeah, it really does. The other thing that One Nation does is they every morning when they do the acknowledgement to country, they turn their back on the president. Kathy Wilcox's cartoon, I thought, picks up perfectly. It's giving burqas a bad name. Are you okay?
They call me Pauline.
Yeah. It's on Thursday. Barnaby Joyce came in during members' 90-second statements and basically resigned during that statement.
90 seconds is not enough.
That's not enough for Barnaby. No. I did love this Lucas Kosh picture because it's got Barnaby in his current seat and Barnaby where he's going, which is the cross bench. The Teals were actually taunting him at one point, going...
Patting the seat,
come on over. Yeah. I thought that Warren Brown was perfect here. He's got Pauline Hanson leaving the Black Friday sale with a bargain Barnaby.
Well, the one sale you've been waiting for all year and you finally get what you want.
Sale of the century.
It's not just white goods.
As he always does, David Rowe with Don't Let the Gate Hit You on the way out, and a very disturbing nude Barnaby.
I'm a little bit embarrassed to tell you where my eyes looked at first in this cartoon, but it's another brilliant David Rowe.
Yeah, Barnaby, all hat, no cattle, as Pauline's up in the One Nation van. Come on, Barnaby, dinner's getting cold.
The end.
Finally, Alex, the cartoon Walkley has gone to David Pope from the Canberra Times with his Gaza cartoon. Can't you see I'm not finished, as the poor little Gaza refugee here has got no food in the bowl.
Yeah, it's a powerful cartoon.
It's a very powerful cartoon.
Huge congratulations to David Pope.
Alex, it's been a great pleasure unpicking the events of a very busy last sitting week, and we'll see you next year.
Thank you, Mike, for having me on. Back to you, David.
Well, a big congratulations to David Pope as well. Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Mike, who had a busy day yesterday at the Lodge shooting all those pictures of the wedding for us all. The PM gets a brief honeymoon, but he will be back with us here on this show for our final show of the year next weekend. Also, a very happy birthday to Claudia Long.
Oh,
and thank you for joining us on your birthday, getting up early for us.
What to get for the woman who has everything, you know?
Exactly.
Inside.
A final observation, perhaps.
So this week, in amongst all of the busyness, the National Auditor released their report on the National Redress Scheme, which is for people who were sexually abused as children in institutions, and they found that management of that scheme is only partly effective. The average wait time, 16.3 months. The number of people getting their cases solved or addressed and finalised has shrunk year on year as well. So lots of people saying to us that they've been waiting a really long time. It's been a distressing process. These people have gone often, in fact, always through really traumatic things in their life. And one of the recommendations was for the government to improve communication with people who are applying to this scheme. We've heard from people who say they don't hear anything for months, which is incredibly distressing for them. So it'll be interesting to see how the government improves that.
Absolutely. Paul?
The Prime Minister's rightfully feeling pretty good about himself, understandably, but this week was an important week in Parliament where some of the frustration of Labor has just started to bubble to the surface. I think there was an important moment on Friday where Ed Husick, the now backbencher, spoke to my colleague James Massola and said this government's not ambitious enough, there's a big agenda they're not tackling. The Prime Minister in question time rubbished the prospect of a conscience vote on gambling, which Mike Freelander has been pushing. And there's a bit of conversation going on among some of the second and third term MPs in this big sprawling caucus about their prospect of promotion. So it'll be interesting in the second year of the Albanese government, which is a key year in terms of setting up its future agenda, as to whether the Prime Minister can tamp down that concern in his caucus.
Yeah, good point. Karen?
We're in the middle of 16 days of international focus on violence against women and eliminating that. There was a gathering here in Canberra yesterday looking at the treatment of women and girls in Afghanistan under the Taliban. 2 million plus girls can't access education anymore. There was discussion about the underground schools movement that is starting to emerge both there and supported internationally. The story was told of groups of girls choosing one girl, going somewhere where she can get a mobile phone signal with a single phone, downloading course materials being supplied from abroad. screenshotting it, handing it around, handwriting out the course materials, handwriting the exercises and homework, and then doing it all in the reverse. They're being supported by people overseas, including in Australia. So shout out to those people for the work they're doing, and to the courageous young girls, because their country's future depends on them.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, well said, and amazing to think what some have to do to get an education. Thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Finally, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, he's facing all sorts of political difficulties and now might be lucky to escape school detention after uttering those two numbers that drive teachers crazy. If you don't know what 67 means, join the club. Just know that kids love saying it and love the fact that we have no idea. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
Oh, it's not on the page.
6-7. Yeah. 6-7. Everyone here. 6-7. Are you doing page 6-7?
We're not over that yet. We're not over that. Still very much a thing.
That's a bit wild.
Stuff for that lovely 6-7. You know, children get into trouble today in Maths School.
Oh, do they? Sorry about that.
No, it's absolutely fine.
I didn't start it, miss.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.